Hello, everyone. I'm going to talk to you today about the relationship between Gwyn ap Nuith and the Morrigan. Um, it's really fascinating because I'd never come across a situation before where two deities, archetypes, one of the divine masculine, a protector, one of the divine feminine, and prophecy and the spiritual journey and death had interacted together at the same time with me and clearly respected each other, but had some fundamental differences about how they conducted themselves. Um, and so I'm going to talk to you today about what Gwyn says about the Morrigan. I'm walking in the woods and I'm walking my dogs who are in here actually. So if suddenly a large head appears or you hear noise, it's because there are two disruptors, two enormous disruptors in the room. Um, so I'm walking in the woods and I suddenly feel on my head, I can feel antlers growing on my head. And then I feel Gwyn ap Nuith walking beside me. And by this time, I've got quite an established relationship with him. He's helped me a lot. He's helped my spiritual progression. He's helped my personal development. He's helped my outlook on life. He's really talked me through lots of difficulties and he's been very protective and supportive of the journey that I find myself on because this is still fairly early on in my journey. This is 2019. Um, so I feel these antlers grow on my head, and then I feel Gwyn walking beside me. And I say to him, I wish that you could always stay, that you could always be here, because I feel so much stronger when you're with me. And he says that he has others to attend to. And, many of you will have contact with Gwyn ap Nuith and know that, he has a busy social life. um, he said that he can't always be with me. And sometimes there is a time for rest and other times where things would begin again. And so I ask him about Bave, one of the Morrigan sisters, the one that comes to me from the triple goddess. It's specifically Bave that comes to me. She is very closely aligned with Isis and her sister Nephthys when she comes to me. Whether that's an archetypal link, it could well be. Nephthys is Nephthys doesn't have a body. Nephthys in absentia is what Bave has said to me before, which means she is physically absent. She has no body. So you have Isis, the wind goddess, and Nephthys, her sister, who are archetypal representations of the seen and the unseen divine feminine. And Bave very much is linked to Nephthys, especially when she comes to me. And so I ask Gwyn about Bave because I know they don't get on. They've appeared at the same time before and basically had an argument over me, over what the best thing to advise me would be, as they fundamentally disagreed on their way of operating. So I thought, now I've got Gwyn on my own, I'm going to ask him why it is. So she, and I tell him, but he knows, she thinks, so Bave, the Morrigan, one of the Morrigan, thinks that Gwyn ap Nuith is too passive, that he lets things unravel, that he lets nature and the flow take its course, and that he's too passive and he allows things to happen that she wouldn't. Gwyn thinks that she meddles. That's what he says to me, that the Morrigan meddles is the word he uses. And I said to him, because I had quite a trusting relationship with him at that point, he'd been very kind and very helpful to me, and very supportive of what was happening to me psychically. He'd been kind of talking me through not getting frightened of what was happening to me. And so I had this relationship with him. So I was worried, I didn't know Babe as well. I thought, she's a dark goddess, might not be a good idea. And so I said to him, is she all right, basically, or is she too dark? Is she not someone I should be dealing with? And he says she's your shadow, which is fascinating because he's come before in a dark form that I call the burner. And it's almost like he's reflecting back at you and mirroring back at you the parts of yourself you don't want to see. And this is an aspect he talks about now with Babe and with the Morrigan, in the way that she appears how you need to see her. And if she appears in a way that is frightening, she's showing you the part of yourself that you're frightened of. And he said that she is my teacher, and that's okay. But she is not always good, he said. So, like many dark goddesses, they have a tougher side, but it depends how you interact with them. If you're respectful and you learn what they're willing to teach, then you don't get the difficult lessons. But it's the same in life, isn't it? If you have a lesson to learn, a soul level, and you choose to bypass that, often the universe will bring it back to you in a more obvious way, and sometimes a less kind way. Certainly, if you ignore signs from the universe, often you find that they come and smack you in the face. So you can't ignore them anymore. So it's much the same, I find, with beings like Gwyn and the Morrigan. So he says, you both love and fear her like every good mother. And I laugh. Because much like Hecate, the Morrigan likes you to call her mother because she likes that role. And she was a mother. She, in mythology, she has children, real ones, her own. And she likes that role of helping you develop and learn, but also showing you when you need to learn your lessons. And that is a parental role. So Gwyn says, you both love and fear her like every good mother. And I laugh. You love your mother. This is what he's saying. You love your mother, but you also need a healthy dose of fear in order to do what she says. All right. And I say, yes, I suppose she's no different from sort of relationships that or certainly I had with my parents, because I grew up, in an age where smacking was still allowed. So there was that healthy dose of fear. You fell in line. And then Gwyn says to me, and I am your father. So I think this is an interesting analogy, the mother and the father, the divine masculine, the divine feminine. Jesus refers to God as his father, the Holy Father. I mean, in a way, you're talking about this ancient, in whatever form it takes, that whatever form the prophet takes or the universe takes, you're talking about ancient representations of the divine masculine and the divine feminine, of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, of Mother Mary, and the universe itself, as the mother and father of, even if you go back to indigenous beliefs, like Aboriginal beliefs, which are, more than 10 or 11,000 years old, based on them having to try to marry up the stories. They talk about, Mother Earth and Father Sky, and you get this concept as well in First Nation does in American culture as well. So I think it's very interesting that they use these father and mother analogies, and it's almost like it's a universal language of spirit, regardless of what um, being or deity or spirit that's coming from. It's like they converse to you in a way that you fundamentally understand at a core level. So he says that he is my father, a shepherd. Again, another hugely Christian analogy to us in the West, but obviously another one that is hugely ancient as well. If you look at Egyptian imagery that predates Christianity by thousands of years, they have crooks. There is this protector imagery of having a shepherd's crook to guide your and protect your flock. So they're using imagery and language that transverses cultures and times. So he says, I'm your shepherd, and Babe, your teacher. And I say, but yet you don't agree or get on all of the time, most of the time, in fact, which makes things difficult for me. Um, and he says, I sometimes come in darkness, but it is still benevolent. Again, he uses the word benevolent, which infers a constant undercurrent of kindness, even when the lesson he's teaching might be hard. And he says, Babe, well, the Morrigan, she is more human. Now that's interesting because he was human as well, Gwyn ap Nuith, but he's very much embodied now this psychopomp, uh, shepherd of the journey's role, whether that journey is from a soul who's passed into the light, or whether that is the journey of a living soul from somewhere they need to be to the place they need to get to through the type of learning that he imparted to me. But he refers to the Morrigan as more human, which to me implies having more faults, having more susceptibility to temptation, or having more weaknesses in a way. And he says she is more flawed. With me, Gwyn, I am always looking to the greater good, and with her, the Morrigan, or Babe specifically, there is very much a sense that sometimes she has her own motives, as well as yours at heart. So it's almost like Gwyn ap Nuith is saying, when I come to you, whether I come in lightness or in dark, I always am doing something that's going to help you, regardless of how it affects me. It doesn't affect me, him. But when the Morrigan comes, sometimes she's got your best interest at heart, but it serves her as well. It serves some other purpose that she has. And there is this sense with the Morrigan that she's always got some other stuff going on, There's always a bigger, you're just a cog in the wider scheme of things of what she's doing. So he says she's more flawed, she's more human. And that she has our best interests at heart, but also her own. And he says, you, meaning me, you are slightly aware to the fact that she may be up to something, which I find funny. But trust her because she has shown you that you can and she can be very kind. And so I think he's saying, whilst she might sometimes be up to something, it's never detrimental to you. It's just whatever side hustle she's got going on. Um, but he is very, there's this sense that Gwyn ap Nuith is extremely disapproving of this human weakness, that he sees it as a weakness, this humanness to her, this flaw. He sees her as flawed. And then he says, I say I'm unsure where I should be going now because I feel caught between the two of them. You know, sometimes they'll actively disagree on advice for me or leading my next step in spiritual development. Back then, they don't now. They come separately now. Of course, spiritually divorced. And he says, trust her because she has shown herself to be kind. And what you should be doing now, where you should be going, you should certainly just be. So he's talking about being present and spend time quietly and concentrate on your children, this sort of thing. And I say that it feels strange not to, because I'm obviously going through like a fallow period or like a shavasana type period in my spiritual development where nothing much is happening, or I don't feel there's much progress happening. And the Morrigan is very much like poke, come on, let's do some more. And Gwyn is saying, no, you don't, you know, he disagrees with Babe that you need to be always driving forward, and actually, like Shavasana, taking time to alchemize and transmute what you've learned and just focusing on enjoying your children and spending time quietly and allowing what you've learned to become part of you is just as important, even if it feels strange not to be continually going forward, because even when you're not doing anything, you're allowing yourself to develop. And I ask him about the Morrigan saying about a war, which turned out to be lockdown and the war on the virus. I'm not going to get dragged into arguments over COVID and what it was about and this sort of thing. I'm simply putting it in context that the Morrigan had come to me and given me forewarning that something was going to happen that I needed to prepare for in order to have a better experience of it. So we're merely mentioning lockdown and COVID in the sense of putting it in a time frame and in context. So this is obviously, this conversation is obviously 2020 then, because I've said to Gwyn, you know, well, what about Babe's war then? That turned out not to be a war, but it was the language that they were using. And that a tsunami was coming. I'd had a dream about a tsunami coming, that the Morrigan had sent me as well, that turned out not to be a tsunami. There wasn't a tsunami in the UK, but obviously there was this wave, right? Waves that, again, they used the waves of the virus as they were using the actual language, weren't they? War on the virus, waves that the virus was coming in. And so Spirit and Babe had been trying to show me and say to me there was going to be a war, and showing me a tsunami coming over the British coast. But obviously it turned out not to be an actual tsunami. It was these waves. Again, no comments about anything about COVID, please. I'm just putting this in context. So I asked Gwyn about what about that sort of thing? You know, is she meddling when she's showing me that sort of thing. And he said, you would be in danger if she didn't do such things. So he obviously approves of her meddling if it involves protecting his charges directly. But there's a fine line. He obviously thinks sometimes she oversteps the mark, I think. But I think it's very, very funny how these different representations of the divine masculine and the divine feminine don't always work in harmony. And I think very much I've come to understand both Gwyn ap Nuith and Bave as the yin and yang, as appearing in both darkness and in light, but all for your greater good, all for your development. And when you look at the yin yang symbol, in the white half, there is a spot of black, and in the black half, there is a spot of white. And that's very much how I see the Morrigan and Gwyn ap Nuith, in that they're not angels, they're not these beings of light, but they're not demons either. They're not these beings of darkness. They are simply beings that try to help you develop your soul into your true calling, and that even when they appear dark, they are always in balance. There is always this greater good that it is for. They've never attacked me or harmed me in any way. They've never done anything to hurt me in the way of love. They've never done anything to infiltrate my energy in any way. So they've never attempted to interfere with my personal energy or my personal space. They're merely communicating with me and helping me learn and understand. And I think it's really important that we understand that how they present in balance as the light and the dark is a perfect representation of the universe. And, if everything was wonderful, we wouldn't learn some tough lessons we need to learn, like appreciating the beauty in death, appreciating special moments with people because they don't have long left, learning a hard lesson about standing up for yourself or advocating for yourself in some way. None of that would be possible if we only learned through really positive experiences and everything was great. And equally, if everything was dark, we'd all feel really low and we wouldn't have anything like hope, which sometimes that's all you have to go on, live on hope, or sometimes that hope is the spark that is a catalyst for a huge revolution in personal development or culturally. So the fact that Gwyn ap Nuith and Bave present as the divine masculine and the divine feminine together, even if they don't always agree, there is some undercurrent of methodology disagreement there, even though they sometimes appear in a dark form with a harsh lesson. It's all for the greater good, and it's all for achieving a balanced soul that has learned as much as it can, and it's during its time here on Earth. So don't be scared when the deities identify themselves properly but still appear dark. They're appearing that way to reflect back at you something really important that you need to consider about yourself and why you are afraid of that thing. So, take steps to protect yourself, listen with open ears, but don't feel fear when you need to learn a lesson that isn't perhaps the kindest one. Okay, so I hope you found that interesting about the weird relationship between Gwyn ap Nuith and the Morrigan. And hopefully I'll be back soon with some more conversations with Otherworld.